It's no secret that for nearly as long as we can remember, wealthy, self styled philanthropists have backed numerous activist groups monetarily. While in some cases I'm sure these groups were funded due to being ideologically aligned with their donors, there are also some that have clear conflicts of interest and others that are a little bit more complicated than that. One of the big activist movements local to me is an ecological group protesting the construction of the Keystone Pipeline, an international oil pipeline that runs from the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin in Alberta, Canada, all the way down to oil refineries in Illinois and Texas. Now, the opposition to the pipeline cites things like oil spills and carbon emissions as problems, despite the insistence that all safety precautions will be followed and that the routes that led through at-risk areas had been changed. Now, the science behind it appears to bear it out. There are, of course, risks involved with the pipeline, but these risks are far lower than the risks associated with our current methods of transport by rail. Interestingly, several politicians have also come out in opposition to the Keystone Pipeline, including Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders spoke on it as well, but only to say that he wants more information on it before he's able to take a stance. The pipeline would be undoubtedly cheap and an effective way to transport the oil across the continent. Now, enter Warren Buffett. Now, I'm sure many of you are fully aware of who Warren Buffett is. Billed as the most successful investor in the world, his money can be attached to a great many things, some good, some questionable. But some of Buffett's investments see a return of up to $85 billion a year through oil by rail operations from two rail companies owned by Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway Corporation. Even more interestingly is Buffett's connection to the Tides Foundation, a large-scale, secretive group based out of San Francisco that bills itself as an environmental group that receives up to $30 million from Buffett himself. So here we have a conflict of interest. Supposedly grassroots organizations such as Honor the Earth and the Indigenous Environmental Network is being funded and encouraged to protest the creation of these pipelines, funded by a man who stands to gain from blocking the Keystone and Sandpiper pipelines. A few years back, many of you might remember the Femin protests. Now, I'm certain you know the ones, usually concerning a number of topless women storming into political rallies, trade fairs, churches, strip clubs, and had spent considerable effort attempting to block what they perceived as an attempt to legalize prostitution in the Ukraine. While they billed themselves as a radical movement of sextremists to protect women's rights, all they really did was annoy a few people and, well, impress Vladimir Putin. All they really fostered was a sense of divisiveness, and most people just rolled their eyes at the group. But Femin's been quiet for the past year or two, reportedly ever since they attempted to fund an Israeli chapter of Femin, when billionaire philanthropist George Soros pulled his support of the group. Now, correlation isn't always causation, but I find it interesting that other groups notorious for its divisive and hardline views on race that even rivals the old school KKK in terms of their goals, which are oddly aligned in many cases, the Black Lives Matter movement, has also reportedly received funding from George Soros. Now, if Poll is to be believed, it's part of a vast Zionist conspiracy going back hundreds of years to destroy the white Christian population. And, I mean, hell, I know people in real life who believe this. Me? I don't really know what to believe. But what I do know is enough to make me question the intent of funding these groups. To me, it harkens back to what appears to be an age-old subterfuge that old money families like to play. Why do it yourself when you can pay someone else to do it? At the birth of the feminist movement in the late 1960s, in an era where the conversation on civil rights had erupted into outright riots, a young woman by the name of Gloria Steinem penned an article entitled "After Black Power, Women's Liberation," which saw her thrust into the limelight as a leader of the feminist movement. What few realized, however, is that it's unlikely she got the attention she did by chance. Here's Steinem, in her own words, talking about her time in the CIA during an earlier era.
Gloria, at the festival, you worked for the Independent Research Service.
That's right.
Well, exactly when did your own association with the CIA start, and in what fashion? Did they come to you, or did you go to them?
In 1958, when I came home from India, I discussed with student leaders, past and present, many of them active with the National Student Association, this kind of small foundation to encourage Americans to go. They thought it was a good idea, too. I was then told by foundations and professors and friends that I should not do this, that I would get in trouble with the House Un-American Activities Committee, the American Legion, all of those 50s people. And I became convinced that it was impossible. It was at that point that the student leaders said to me that they had in the past received funds for international programs from the CIA, and that they felt that this was important and could also be partly funded by the CIA.
Well, I mean, did you feel that you really tried? I mean, did you go around to all of the wealthy private foundations, wealthy private people, and explain your point of view, and explain why you felt it was important that the United States be represented at these things in a certain way? What did they tell you?
They told me that, well, the Ford Foundation, for instance, told me that they thought we were too liberal and too controversial, and that we would endanger their cultural programs in Austria. I mean, the first festival was being held in Vienna. It was not encouraging at all, and the private individuals to whom I went often had particular points of view to put forward, which would have been much, much more restricting than the CIA funds were, which were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
What do you mean they were free? You mean to say it was easier for you to work for the CIA than a private organization?
That's right. And the reason I think that comes as a surprise, as it did to me at the time. I mean, I had the conventional liberals' view of the CIA as a right-wing incendiary group, and I was amazed to discover that this was far from the case, that they were enlightened, liberal, nonpartisan activists of the sort who characterized the Kennedy administration, for instance.
You have not been working now for the CIA since 1962. You still criticize. You were down recently in Washington?
Yes, when the story broke that I had once been, that I had for 4 years been a Central Intelligence agent, I was demonstrating outside the Pentagon underneath Mr. McNamara's office against bombing in Vietnam. And this didn't precisely fit with the image of a CIA agent, but then neither does the CIA.
So Steinem describes the CIA as enlightened, liberal, and nonpartisan activists. Enlightened, liberal, nonpartisan activists. Now, it's interesting to me that the CIA just wanted her to do her own thing. Now, I think that's a little less due to their faith in her and more for how useful that she would be in serving a purpose the CIA was likely invested in. Basically, psychological operations, information wars. Regardless, it was the CIA who funded Steinem, and by extension, the rise of second-wave feminism. In fact, Ms. Magazine, which still exists today, was at the very least indirectly funded by the CIA. Now, very few people actually realize that the CIA is a civilian agency, which is contracted by the government to gather intelligence. This allows them to claim plausible deniability and to otherwise act in regions in which, if a sanctioned government official had, would be considered acts of war. It's a well-understood allegation against the CIA that they've got their fingers deep in a number of illegal activities, including human experimentation stretching back 50 years, drug trafficking, intimidation, and blackmail. Enlightened, liberal, nonpartisan activists. Now, admittedly, it's time to put the tinfoil hat on for a moment. What was the purpose of the women's liberation movement? Proponents would say to ensure equal treatment for women, and who could argue with that? On its face, it's something that I agree should be the case. Equal treatment, equal pay for equal work under the law, equal treatment in courts, all that jazz. But what if there was another reason? Here is a clip of an interview between Alex Jones and Aaron Russo taken before he died, talking about his time as a friend of a member of the Rockefeller family.
Well, one of the things they told me was that he was at the house one night, and we were talking, and he started laughing. He said, "Aaron, what do you think women's liberation was about?" And I said, I had pretty conventional thinking about it at that point. I said, I think it's about women having the right to work, getting equal pay with men, just like they won the right to vote, you know? And he started to laugh. He said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Why am I an idiot?" He said, let me tell you what that was about. We, the Rockefellers, funded that. We funded women's lib, you know? And we're the ones who got all over the newspapers and television, the Rockefeller Foundation. He says, and you want to know why? He says, there were two primary reasons. And they were, one reason was we couldn't tax half the population before women's lib. And the second reason was, now we get the kids in school at an early age. We can indoctrinate the kids how to think. It breaks up the family. The kids start looking at the state as the family, as the school, as the officials, as their family, not as the parents teaching them. And so those are the two primary reasons for women's lib, which I thought up to that point was a noble thing. You know, when I saw their intentions behind it, where they were coming from when they created it, the thought of it, I saw the evil behind what I thought was a noble venture.
Now, that's Alex Jones, so take it with a grain of salt, but it does make you think. Just because something might be noble on its face doesn't mean it's truly a noble thing. I like to think we're well past the age of naivety, but it's clear that we're anything but. Even I admit that I might be naive in many of my beliefs, which is why I think it's important to keep a skeptical but open mind on these matters. So the question then comes to, well, are there any activist groups out there that are worth their while? Now, to me, the answer is yes. On September 17, 2011, the Occupy Wall Street movement took shape with massive support from Adbusters magazine. For years, Adbusters had been on the cutting edge of calling out the names of those they held responsible for the economic downturn, economic disparity, and often shady corporate practice. Soon afterwards, the movement spread to nearly every major North American city, including my own, which has a population of less than 80,000, as well as several European cities. The movement comprised of people from all across the political spectrum, counting liberals, conservative, and non- or bipartisan people from all walks of life. For months, wealthy bankers and investors heard hundreds of thousands of people screaming for their heads from the streets below their air-conditioned offices. But the movement fizzled out. A movement that comprised of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of protesters and supporters just fizzled out and was quickly forgotten. Why? Some blame drugs. After all, a tent city in the middle of an urban area is bound to draw drugs and drug dealers in. It was also revealed that, despite being a peaceful movement, the Joint Terrorism Task Force had engaged in an extensive surveillance and infiltration of the groups. And eventually, the progressive stack was introduced. Speakers who before were propped up due to either their popularity or the merit of their ideas were pushed to one side in favor of an ideology which insisted that only the most oppressed people should be the first to speak. Now, in theory, it might have sounded nice, but in practice, it hindered the movement by instead relying on superficial traits such as gender or skin color to choose speakers rather than good ideas. The ideas that might have kept the movement going drifted to the bottom. Soon after, the camps started to become vacant, and then due to a number of controversies involving drugs, most were cleared out entirely by police forces, some of whom were staunch supporters of the initial goals of the movement in the first place. So what do you guys think? While many of us would like to support the stated goals of an organized group, how can we be certain the stated goals are all there is to it? Clear we should be rightfully skeptical of any group that airs its grievances in a divisive manner like Femin or Black Lives Matter, or that attempts to subvert our paradigms in contrast to empirical data, academia, and science. But I think it's even more important to look into the names of the people who are bankrolling these groups and ask ourselves whether they support it because they believe in it, or whether it's to serve a purpose beyond what we're being told. Now, I don't often delve into matters of conspiracy theory, and I try my damnedest to maintain a skeptical eye when getting into matters like this, but the reality is that even that might be too naive. So thanks for listening today, guys. I really do want to know your thoughts on these matters, and if you have any other such examples of activists being bankrupt by philanthropists with clear conflicts of interest, let me know. And be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll be back with another video next week. Peace.